Hi, we're back for our concluding session. We want to look at the last part of this, and that is to identify the excuses that Moses gave to the Lord. And there were many. In chapter 3, verse 16 and onward, God gives him many different promises, all the way to verse 22. Talks about the people of Israel and what's going to happen, what Pharaoh's going to do, what the elders are going to do, and that God's going to lead them out of that Egypt, and he's going to give them a land flowing with milk and honey. In chapter 4, he gives his third excuse. After God introduced himself and gave him a clear calling and said, I want you to be intimate with me. I want you to know me in a deep and personal way. Then Moses answered, in chapter 4, verse 1, Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? See, Moses is still that insecure servant. Even after the Lord speaks to him, he hasn't changed at all. He says, I'm afraid that they won't listen to me. They didn't listen to me before. Why would they listen to me now? And so the Lord has an answer for that. And he says, what's in your hand? And he says, just a stick. And he says, take that stick and throw it on the ground. And you know the story. It turns into a serpent. He picks it up by the tail. It turns back into a stick. And God says, this is going to be a sign. It's going to be the proof that I'm with you. And for the people, you are to perform this sign for the people of Israel, for the elders of Israel. And then there's a second sign. You take your hand and put it inside your bosom. Put it inside your cloak. And bring your hand out. It's going to be leprous. And he did. And it was whiter than snow. And then God says, put your hand back into your cloak and bring it back out. And it became like a baby skin, all brand new. And then God says, as the third sign, I'm going to give you power to take a pitcher of water and dip it into the well from the Nile and pour it out before Pharaoh, and it's going to turn into blood. God says, I give you a guarantee that they're going to listen because I'm giving you signs and wonders so that I can bring them out of Egypt with a strong and mighty hand, and they will believe. So we see there's three signs, and this is the third excuse that Moses gives. But he doesn't stop there. After he gets all these signs, he gives the fourth excuse, and he says, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to me. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. That's chapter 4 and verse 10. And the Lord answers this. See, Moses wanted to say, I don't have the abilities that you're asking me to use. I'm not a spokesman. I've been 40 years in the wilderness. I hardly ever talk to anybody. I talk to sheep, and I talk to my wife once in a blue moon when I get home, but I'm not a speaker. I'm not a public image. I lost all that in Egypt. I've forgotten how to speak the language of the Egyptians, and I don't speak Hebrew that well either. And yet we know that Moses was trained in the University of Cairo. He learned at least 4 languages, knew how to write them, and he knew how to speak them, but he's so insecure. He says, Lord, I can't do this. You're asking me to do something that's really hard. And I think behind that is this fear of going back to Egypt. It's a scary thing, going back to the one that wanted to kill you, going back to the people that didn't like you, going back to the memories of his stepmother and killing a man, and all that just comes up to the surface. So Moses was very insecure, and God says, here's my answer to that. Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight and makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and teach you what you should say. That's a pretty great promise. I will be with you. I will help you to speak, and I will teach you what to say. Moses listens to that with that blank stare and says, send somebody else. In other words, he absolutely said, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to do what you're asking me to do. It's too hard. I don't know how to do it. I'm not able to do it, and I just refuse to do it. So find somebody else. Wow. It's a wonder that God didn't strike him dead, as he did many people when they rebelled in that way. But Moses, God understood his heart. The guy was petrified. The guy was traumatized. He had a terrible experience in Egypt, had a terrible experience killing a man, didn't feel worthy anymore, had committed murder, ran into the wilderness and knew that there was a contract out on his life. So he was afraid to go back, but God was merciful. Even in his fear, God was merciful to him. It says the anger of the Lord was kindled against him. God was angry when he said, please send somebody else. says God's anger burned against Moses, but he didn't strike him dead. What did God do? He said, how about your brother Aaron? Your brother Aaron, he can speak pretty well. He's older than you are. He's got a more maturity than you. He'll speak for you, and he's already on his way. And later on, we read that God spoke to Aaron and told him to leave Egypt and go meet his brother in the desert. And Aaron was already on his way when God made this promise. So you see, God was putting all things together to make it possible for Moses to be that great deliverer for the people of Israel. Despite his fears, despite his insecurity, despite all of his doubts and his excuses, God says, I have chosen you to do this task. Go, and I will be with you. Now God speaks to you and to me, and he says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Whatever I ask you to do, I will equip you to do. Do not be afraid. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. May the Lord bless you as you continue to read and study his word. I encourage you to download the documents because there's much more meat to what we presented here. God bless you.